little boo-boo on the last one, so we're going this time. So we're a couple of functional areas and several functional areas into our CDA process, and I always like to look at like the first four functional areas as kind of laying the foundation, setting the tone, and we're at the point now where things are going to get a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging, but this is also the time where we really start learning some awesome stuff and really good material that is shared with you through the process. So I really challenge each of y'all to take this in as much as you can. And like we've mentioned before, really think outside of the box on what you've done in the past, how you can do things differently. And of course, the ultimate goal here is to not only make yourself better, but to make the environment better for your children. This is also the point in the process where a lot of our resources are going to become very helpful to y'all. Now, everyone has their competency booklet, their competency standards, either the green or yellow book, whichever, if you're infant, toddler, or if you're preschool. And make sure that for each functional area we get to, so like right now we're on functional area 5, cognitive. Not only are you wanting to read your essentials textbook, but you really want to pay close attention to this book as well. It's got a lot of additional tips and suggestions and things that you can do in the classroom. And you're going to get a lot of use out of this. We don't use this book in class a whole lot, but as far as the what is applicable to the classroom and how you can apply things in the classroom, this has got some great stuff in it. And almost that entire book is kind of written in a checkbox, a checklist format, and so it's really easy to follow. Okay, so we're on functional area 5 now. We had a week off last week in between physical and cognitive. I know that some of y'all have already started on the cognitive functional area, and a few of you have already submitted your worksheets and your tests, and that's fantastic. You might want to, after we do our webinars this week, go back and review those and add some stuff. But good for y'all for being on top of it. This is a really, really important functional area right here, and we're going to talk a lot about why it's so important. I'm getting some background noise from someone, so please make sure you mute your microphone. I want to try to keep the microphones open, but I can close them if I need to. But I did hear somebody back there. Okay, so I'm still getting some background noise. Okay, I'm going to have to mute everybody. Okay, cool. And then just type in, if you have any questions or comments, type in, or I can unmute the microphones. Just let me know if you need me to do that. All right, so, cognitive development, when we talk about cognitive development, this is going to refer to the child's ability to think as they grow. And I know that we've mentioned in previous webinars and in some of the classes that some of y'all have attended that I teach, we talk a lot about connections on the outside, build connections on the inside. This is something that I want y'all to constantly repeat back to yourself. As we go through a lot of the material, the more connections we build on the outside, the more connections we build within our brain. And you're actually going to see it's going to refer in this functional area, it's going to talk about the child's ability to learn is based on the number of relationships they have in real life. And the more relationships we have and the better the relationship, the better the brain is able to learn. And you're going to see this mentioned in this functional area. We want to expand their memories. The CD-ROM that we have in the back lower part of our brain, where all of our experiences are stored, your memories are basically experiences. And we want a lot of meaningful and positive experiences to sit back there rather than negative, distressed, anxiety, those type of experiences. So this functional area, it's going to go over what is cognitive development. You are going to see it's going to go over the major learning theories, and you've got several questions in your worksheets about those theories. They're really interesting to really read over them and to compare them. And then you'll kind of see that a lot of our philosophies and a lot of our learning come from that, but it's pretty cool. We're really wanting you to spend a lot of time on the executive function of the brain, which is your frontal lobes right up here, and how the executive functions relate to school readiness. And this right here is so powerful because when we talk about, everything that we do in early education lays the foundation for everything that children will become in life. So the 0 to 6 years, it really does. It's the foundation of the house. It's the foundation of the building, and the building can't stand unless you have a strong foundation. And that's what we do during the first 6 years is we lay that foundation. So when you have parents ask these questions like, is my child going to be ready for kindergarten? What is my child learning? All my child does here is play. Your response back to them is, yes, we're building the foundation for learning. It's pretty cool stuff. And this is also evidence that we learn through play. All right, and children learn through play. And in our early childhood setting, play is one of the most important things we can do. And we've talked about this in some of our past conversations as well. And then it's got a little section here about children as scientists. It's kind of fun to read those things right there. When we talk about cognitive development, there's 4 essential aspects of cognitive development, 4 essential aspects that you want to be aware of right here. Number 1 is that children are in a loving and caring relationship with adults. So you've got to reach them before you can teach them. The interactions that you have with your children, so incredibly important. That nurturing environment, they've got to build trust and respect. Children must feel safe before they're able to learn, and that's a big part of cognitive development right there. The second essential aspect of learning, and this is on page 136 in your Essentials textbook, so we're on page 136, I'll type that in. Another essential aspect of learning is that many opportunities to explore the world through seeing, touching, hearing, tasting, and smelling. And this is available to the children. So again, I highlighted this in my Essentials textbook. I hope that you do the same thing. This is a big one as well. Many opportunities to explore the world through seeing, touching, hearing, tasting, and smelling. What are those 5 items right there? That's our senses. Those are our 5 senses. So when we talk a lot in early child development that children learn best through sensory-related activities. Boom, there it is, right there. So the more activities you can do in your early childhood classroom that involve seeing, touching, hearing, tasting, and smelling, the more the child will learn. So I challenge y'all to think about the core areas of learning that you're trying to tackle right there. Whether it's the reading, the writing, the recognizing, the sorting, the sequencing, how can you turn those activities into activities that involve the seeing, the touching, the hearing, the tasting, and the smelling? All right, and kind of challenge yourself. Everything you do in the classroom needs to involve those 5 things. The next essential aspect of cognitive development, you're going to see here on page 136, conversation and language richness in the environment. All right, so a lot of conversation, a lot of open-ended questions, a lot of interaction with the children down at their eye level so that you can earn that respect. A lot of language that is throughout the program, and this is what they're needing right there. And of course, the 4th essential aspect of learning is play. All right, because this is where it's all going to come together. Young children are active learners. We know that. It's not like you're in elementary school. It's not like you're in middle school where you sit in a desk for 55 minutes on each subject and you interact with the teacher while sitting there. We know that in our early childhood setting, depending on what age group you're working with, they can usually sit for about 1 minute per their age. And that's as long as you're going to get them sitting still. So if you're in a 2-year-old classroom, you might get 2 minutes of them sitting still, and then they have to be active. And the crazy thing, and this is where we kind of get on our soapbox, is that we constantly want to criticize our children or judge and stereotype our children because they're active, they're constantly moving, and we're over here yelling at them, sit down, sit down, sit down, when in reality the child is just being a child, because they are active learners. They learn best when they have a trusting relationship with adults. Okay, so again, those connections come into place right there. They need to be active, and they need trusting relationships with the adult. All right. Children are natural pleasers. They want to make us happy, but they've got to have that safe environment and that trusting relationship to make it happen. And the other thing that you've got to keep in mind, and again, I'm still on page 136 of your Essentials textbook, is that children will use their own experiences to make sense of the world. All right. So again, we go back to those memories. We go back to those experiences that are stored in their brain. That's their version of reality. So often when we're working with our children, we want them to see a different version of reality than what theirs is. And that's where they get confused. That's where they don't understand. And this is where normally where you'll see aggression come out, all right, or that frustration that comes out because you've got an adult that is trying to get the child to see reality through a different set of eyes, and it just doesn't happen that way. And I know I mentioned this in my current mini conference that I'm doing, and I've mentioned it in other ones too. One of the most challenging things that you have to do as an early educator is that you have to see the world from the child's point of view. When we talk about cognitive development in early education, okay, again, they use their own experiences to make sense of the world and to learn. Okay, so I'm hoping that this all kind of comes together and it's making sense to you now. So if you really want to teach that child, if you really want to build that foundation and set them up for success, what do you have to do? You have to see the world from their version of reality. Okay, that way you can tap into it and educate them from that standpoint. Okay, and there's a lot of tools in here that's going to help us do that. All right, lots of tools. On page 137 of your Essentials textbook is where it's going to start talking about the major learning theories. I'm not going to go all into this. You guys can read, all of this information. Like I said, it's pretty interesting. All right, pretty interesting for you. But let's go ahead, and I want y'all to skip over, for those of you that do have your Essentials textbook in front of you, skip over to page 143. If you don't have your Essentials, it's okay. You can just listen along. All right. This is some really cool stuff right here on figure 34 when it talks about brain research on cognitive development. And this is just some of the research that has been done over the last 25 years. And some of the findings and what the findings mean. I hope that when you read this, you find it as interesting as I do. And especially, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think back, it's been 20 years since I've been in a classroom. I try to get into a classroom as often as I can, but it's not as much as I would like to. But when you read over some of this stuff, the light bulb goes off, and you're like, oh, now I get it. I wish I would have known this years ago. I would have been such a better teacher to these kids. All right. But there's a couple of things, three things mainly that I really wanted to focus on this figure. That's pretty cool. When it talks about the research findings and it says cognitive skills are linked to both genetics and the environment. So, you talk a lot about what we're born with and the genetics that we're born with. And, successful parents will normally have successful children, but that's not always the case. There's a lot of times that you've got very successful people that came from families that were quote unquote not so successful, but then the child ended up becoming very successful. So it's really, interesting to see that it's a combination of two things, the genetics and the environment. From this right here, what I really like to focus on in our centers is the environment part, okay? Because, as early educators, there's absolutely nothing we can do about genetics. I mean, the child is who the child is, all right? And there's nothing you can do to change that. What we have control over is the environment part, all right? And this is where it's important to have that rich environment, that stimulating environment, the environment that has a purpose, all right? That there's positive and meaningful interactions and experiences within the environment. And once again, what is all of this going to do? It's going to create the connections that are made in the brain, all right? So pretty cool stuff right there. And so, we just finished our functional area, 2 functional areas ago. We did learning environment. And, again, there's a method to the madness on why all of these functional areas fall into the order that they do. One of the really cool things that I like about the CDA process, and especially the way we've got it all laid out right here, is that, we definitely want to focus on health and safety first. Boom, get that out of the way, because health and safety trumps everything, all right? Then we went into learning environment, okay? And I like it that learning environment is at the very beginning of the process, and that y'all were able to write down some of your diagrams. You were able to explain your learning environment. You were able to kind of make that wish list and dream about your learning environment. And everyone did a really nice job on that functional area. But now when we get into the cognitive piece, and then after we get done with cognitive, we'll move into creative, and then we'll move into communication, and it'll just kind of build on top of each other. It's really interesting here, in about 6 or 7 weeks to be able to take everything that we've talked about and learned about, circle back to that learning environment, and see how those dreams and that wish list of thinking that we did, how it's going to change. All right. And I hope that as we're going through this process and you're learning about the enrichments of the classroom and how it relates to cognitive development and the sensory-based learning and all of this stuff, I hope that as we go through this process, you're going back to your classroom and making these little changes. Okay, and so, like I said, one of my favorite parts of the process is to see the before and the after. Okay, and learning environment is one of the most obvious ways to document this, to kind of see that before and after, but it's cool. All right. Again, going back to figure 34 on page 143, where it talks about the research findings. Once again, the primary task of the brain during early childhood is to make connections. So there we are. We bring up the connections once again. Experiences wire the brain. The more wiring in the brain, the better off the child will be. Okay, so lots and lots and lots of connections. All right. How do we build and strengthen these connections? This is a big one. All right, so if you're taking notes, be ready to write this down. Okay, this is a big one. Repetition. Lots and lots of repetition. doing things over and over and over again. Um, when we talk about the wiring of the brain and we talk about repetition and we talk about early child development, I always like to encourage y'all to think back to when you were younger, a child, middle school, whatever it may be, and whenever you first got involved in a sport, all right, whether it was basketball, baseball, tennis, whatever it is that you played, football, um, think back to when you first started playing a sport. Now, your coach did not show you one time how to play that sport and expect you to be successful. He didn't say, here's the baseball bat, stand at the plate, when the ball comes, swing, boom, you're going to be successful. That's not how it works. You've got to learn the basics. You got to learn the basic skills, the functions, and then you stand up to the plate and you practice how to stand. You practice how to bend your knees. You practice on how to hold the bat, and you practice swinging, and you practice and you practice and you practice for years and years and years. You practice. And even when you've mastered some of the skills, you still continue to practice, That's what it's like in early child development, We don't touch on a single subject one or two times and expect the child to get it and retain it and grow from it, okay? That's not how it works in our industry. For our children to be successful, and for the wiring in the brain to take place and to be strong, you've got to practice, 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 practice. All right? So, that's good stuff right there. The more you can do activities in your classroom over and over again, the better off it is. Okay? The other thing on figure 34 that I love, this is another one of my favorite things about this functional area, is recognizing the windows of opportunity. And there's actually one of the test questions for this functional area about windows of opportunity. This, being in an early education classroom is one of my favorite things. The windows of opportunity. It's when you can create a lesson plan that is an enriched lesson plan that's developmentally appropriate, that's got a lot of consistency, routines and rituals and all that good stuff. But y'all know as well as I do that some of the best moments in the classroom is when the child will initiate an opportunity for you to teach. Okay? When the child comes up with something and you take it and run with it. I don't care what's on that lesson plan for the rest of the day. You see that window of opportunity and you take it and you run with it. The reason why this is so special and so important is I want to circle back to our earlier conversation. And remember, we said children learn best through their own experiences, right? So when children learn best through their own experiences, and while sharing their own experiences, you come across that window of opportunity, you've just turned that meaningful experience into an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow. It connects together. It's going to be more meaningful, more memorable, and build stronger connections than anything else you do in the classroom. So it's pretty cool stuff right there. All right. The rest of that chart, again, y'all can kind of read over. Let's go to page 144 in our essentials. And I actually have a whole online training on my website, and it's a lot of what you see here on page 144 and 145, the executive functions and school readiness. This, again, is some really awesome stuff right here. You've got 7 executive functions that the 0 to 3 National Center for Infants, Toddlers, and Families has identified. These 7 social and emotional skills in particular that are essential for school readiness. So if y'all ever have that parent, and let me say, no, scratch that, not if, when you have that parent that asks you, what are you doing, to help my child be ready for kindergarten? Okay, when you have that parent ask you that question, I want you to be able to say, you know what? We're doing 7 things to help your child be ready for kindergarten. And here are the 7 things, and they're listed on page 144 and 145. Number 1, building their confidence. All right. Confidence is developed when children are expected to succeed. All right. When you're setting them up for success, they're going to build their confidence. They're going to be proud of themselves. They're going to be eager to learn. So confidence is probably one of the very first and most important things that you work on in your classroom. How the child sees themselves, how they feel about themselves, and what is their interpretation of success. All right. Awesome stuff right there. The other thing, and those of you that work in a 2-year-old classroom, I want you to really think about this for a moment, especially toddlers too. Curiosity. We want the children to be curious about their environment. We want the children to be curious about learning. Now, normally they get scolded when they're curious, all right? We need to turn that around. When a child is being curious, when they're trying to explore, all right, when they're trying to understand, that's that window of opportunity. That's when we can teach them right there. So instead of scolding the child for being curious, we need to applaud them because they're creating those opportunities right there. This is why I'm going to go a little off subject for just a moment. But when we talk about children who bite, and I bet all of y'all have had biting situations where, why is that child biting? Well, there's 5 reasons why children bite. Pain, frustration, aggression, need for attention, and curiosity. And out of those 5 reasons right there, the number 1 reason why children bite is curiosity. All right? And you might be saying, well, Tim, what does curiosity have to do with biting? Well, going back to growth and development, the first way we learn to explore is by putting things in our mouth. That's why in the infant and toddler room, everything goes in the child's mouth. All right, they're exploring. So when a child is curious about another child, it's their natural instinct to put that curiosity in their mouth. Okay, so it kind of makes sense. Still doesn't make it right for them to bite. We still want to discourage the bite, but at least you understand what's going on there. So this is where, in this situation with the biting, a lot of sensory related activities is going to help that child. The caregiver and the parent understanding that there's an opportunity to teach and that there's some curiosity going on is also going to help that child right there too, and they need that. The next thing we get to is the child's determination and persistence, all right? Their ability to want to do things over and over again. So their intentionality is another executive function that helps with school readiness. This is where, when we talk about children who are overexposed to screen time, children's determination and persistence is decreasing with this right here. Their attention span is decreasing. So we really want to focus on this in our classrooms and encourage that determination and persistence so that they can create more and more connections. Another thing that we're struggling with the overexposure to screen time, and it's another executive function that's being lost, is children's self-control. And self-control is another one that I cannot stress this enough to y'all. Self-control has to be taught, all right? Children are not born knowing how to control themselves and knowing how to control their bodies. And especially the more curious they are, the harder it's going to be to maintain self-control. So it's kind of a double-edged sword as well, okay? But both are very important. Doing active calming techniques is going to help with self-control, but the other two things, teaching empathy to the children, and empathy is getting the child to realize the feelings of other people, all right? And then acts of service, being able to do things for one another. Both of these items, empathy and acts of service, will help with self-control. Okay, it's pretty cool. All right. The child's ability to engage with others, and understanding how they are alike and how they are different, understanding how they relate to one another is another executive function. It's going to strengthen those connections within the brain, and of course the capacity to communicate. Now, a lot of times when I talk about capacity to communicate, we have a lot of people that will question me on, well, what about my nonverbal children? What about my infants? What about my toddlers? I've got this 4-year-old in my classroom that doesn't talk. Okay, I get it. Those are all really important things to discuss and to recognize. But remember, only 7% of communication is the words that come out of your mouth. All right? When we talk about a capacity to communicate, keep in mind that body language and tone are two of the most important things right here. So with your nonverbal children, you can teach body language, you can teach tone, you can gain attention, you can gain trust and respect by that right there. I know we've got several infant teachers that are in CDA class this time around. Y'all know what I'm talking about more than anyone, that in an infant room, when you're communicating and interacting with your children, words are important because we want that environment that is enriched with language. But y'all know that that child can't understand what you're saying. Those words mean nothing to that child in that infant room. But what is important to that infant? Your tone. All right, the sensitivity of the words that are coming out of your mouth, the fluctuation of the words, your composure. Those infants pick up on your composure more than anyone in the building. And when you get stressed out and when you get anxious and your body language is showing it, those infants just go crazy. Okay, and we all know that. So we talk about tone and body language. Y'all get it in the infant room, or hopefully you get it now. All right. I always say that it is impossible for an infant teacher to walk into the building in a bad mood or whatever and then say, well, I'm not going to let my infants know I'm in a bad mood. Yeah, they're going to get it. All right. You don't even have to say anything, and they're like, whoop, teacher's out of it today, because they have that innate ability to do that. All right. And then, of course, cooperativeness is the child's ability to engage in tasks or activities that balance the child's needs with the needs of others. Very similar to the relatedness right there. But again, that compassion, that empathy, that acts of service is going to help you right here. All right. We also talk about learning centers. We're going to circle back over to the learning centers and how learning centers correlate with cognitive development. They're going to help children, understand the concepts such as problem solving, which is important. When we talk about cognitive development, don't be so quick to solve problems for children. You're going to be there to make sure they're safe. You're going to be there to encourage them. But let children solve their own problems. They've got to learn how to do that. All right? That's going to help with those connections in the brain. Give opportunities for children to learn alone and then also learn in groups. All right? This is going to be important. So often in early childhood, we want to do everything as a group, okay? But it's okay to do things one-on-one as well, all right? We want to encourage imaginary play, okay? Because again, children can only see the world through their experiences. That imagination and creativity is going to help them tap into themselves, and we want to encourage that. Try not to, whenever you see a child that is repeating something they've seen in the media, try to get them to come up with their own situations. That's going to help out right there. We talked about self-control. When you focus on these 7 executive functions that we just went over, you're going to see that this is going to help with increasing the child's attention span. All right, I get this question quite often from early educators. How can I get my kids to sit down and circle time longer? How can I get my kids to pay attention to me so I can read an entire book? How can I increase that attention span? Well, there's 7 things you need to work on to increase that attention span. Confidence, curiosity, intentionality, self-control, relatedness, capacity to communicate, and cooperativeness. All right, it's the 7 skills right there. All right. We know from our Texas Pre-K guidelines, we know from our Texas Rising Star guidelines, all of these different little things out there. They expect us to do a lot of sorting and matching and categorizing in early childhood, and sometimes a lot of y'all have asked, why do we have to do so much sorting and matching and categorizing? Because this builds connections in the brain. It's probably, like they all say, one of the most important things you can do too. All right. So provide a lot of those opportunities. Okay. And then also, of course, we know art and music is going to activate a different side of the brain than the rest of this stuff. Art and music is going to help balance that out, and we want that in the early childhood classroom. All right, cool. On page 146 and 147, you have this amazing chart that I want y'all to take a look at. And it's how preschool learning centers impact cognitive growth. I've even, and it's actually 146 through 148, I've actually seen some early childhood teachers, after doing CDA class, take page 146 and page 148 and post it in their classroom. Okay, this is incredible stuff right here on why we do what we do and how it helps the child learn. Take page 146 through 148 and use it the next time you have a parent meeting or a parent training or during your parent-teacher conferences. Those of you that write newsletters and send out to your parents, this is fantastic material to share with them, okay? When we talk about, for example, the block center right here, how the child plays in the block center. They build towers, they build bridges and airports out of hard blocks. How you can support learning in this center. Ask a lot of questions. Pose some problems. What would happen if I pull out this block? And allow the child to give you some suggestions. So what is the child learning right here? Look at this. Predicting, problem solving, understanding cause and effect. Awesome stuff right here. So I love page 146 through page 148. You got some great stuff. I'm not going to go over all of this because of time, but I wanted to point this out and make sure that y'all saw this and everything. One last thing that I really wanted to make sure that we got into today's webinar is on page 149. It's going to talk about learning throughout the day. Learning does not just take place in learning centers. Learning does not just take place during circle time. The child is able to learn all day long. And again, when you look at page 149, I really want y'all to do some reflecting, and I want you to really think back to what you've been doing in your classroom, even what you did this morning. And I want you to think about these other times during the day, and did you take advantage of that opportunity to teach? All right. And did you miss some windows of opportunity during these transition times, let's just call it? All right. So choice time, free play. All right. Transition time, eating and meal time, lunch time over on the next page, on page 150, sleeping time and nap time, diaper changing, arrival and departure, walking around the playground, field trips if you do those, other teachable moments. Learning takes place all day long. You never get a break from it. Never. That's why at night when we go home, when you are able to leave your school or leave your classroom, we should be exhausted. If you're not exhausted at the end of the day, you didn't do enough teaching, all right? Because you never get a break from it. It just continues to go all day long, all right? Very cool. We've got some other things, some other supportive type items. These are the main things in our Essentials textbook that I wanted to make sure I went over with y'all on the webinar today. I've got a different webinar that I'm going to do for y'all on Thursday, but I wanted to touch base on those parts. Make sure that y'all are reading your Essentials textbook. When I'm going through your worksheets, I can tell who's reading and who's not. I'm just going to be honest with y'all out there, because I can see elements of the Essentials material in some of your answers, and then I can tell by some of the answers, I don't think you've cracked open a book. All right. But there's some awesome stuff in here. That's the reason why I could easily teach this class without Essentials, but I use Essentials because it's so amazing. All right. Now, for those of you, there's I think 4 of you that have already completed your worksheets for functional area cognitive, and and I responded back to y'all. This is a tough functional area. The questions are a little tougher than normal, and you've got to do a lot of thinking and probably going back to your Essentials and looking at some information. But don't make it more difficult than it is. All right, just kind of focus on the material. Do the best you can. Okay. But if I give y'all more feedback than what I've given in the past on your answers, don't be hurt or upset. It's just I want to make sure that y'all learn the most you can. Now the test on this functional area. Again, these questions get a little bit more difficult, but again, if you just read your Essentials, you're going to be just fine. But I may, even if you give a quote-unquote right answer, I'll probably give you some additional feedback just to help reinforce what we're learning for this particular chapter, all right? Because we are, we're kind of getting to the point where, yes, there are right and wrong answers, but a lot of the right answers could be written a lot of different ways, okay? And that's where my job comes in, to take a look at each individual person, knowing your program and what I've learned from your program, and is your answer correct based on what I know about you. So I may still give you some feedback even though you got the right answer, okay? Hope that makes sense right there. All right. I'll unmute. Any questions or comments about anything that we went over today? No? Okay, cool. Again, I always try to shoot for about a 45-minute webinar so that y'all have time to transition back into wherever you're going. I know that most of y'all today probably have some fun Valentine's Day parties to attend to. Some of you may have already did it. Some of you are probably doing it this afternoon. Have fun. Be safe. Watch out for choking hazards. Those little heart candies can be dangerous for some children, so be careful with that. Hope you're wearing your red for Valentine's Day. Spread lots of love to the children, to your family, and to all of your loved ones. Remember, you can email me or text message me if you have any questions. Thursday will be a pre-recorded webinar that I will have up for you by Thursday. But we will be going on our training cruise on Thursday, and then I will definitely see everybody live next Tuesday. So y'all have a fun day. See everyone later.
Bye. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you too.